Hey there, everybody. It's Mike DiLisio, and let's keep this winter spectacular moving with my top 10 solo games of 2020. This year has been a year when many people have been looking into solo gaming, maybe even more than in years past. I would say over the last few years, in general, solo gaming has become a bigger part of the board gaming hobby, but more and more people have been interested as they've had to stay more indoors and maybe not getting together with friends to play games as much. They've started to look more at solo games, and thankfully, there have been some really big pushes to have solo variants available. And so this year, there was no shortage of great solo games. So let's go ahead and get started. At number 10, I have Warp's Edge. Warp's Edge is what is known as a bag building game where you've got a bag that you're pulling little chits out of and trying to use these to destroy alien invaders. And the ultimate goal of Warp's Edge is to try to defeat this mothership. And you have to get through a series of enemies before you can oftentimes get to that mothership because they're dealing damage to you. And so it's a quick playing game. It has just the right level of complexity for a game of this length and weight. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a nice, snappy little game. I've liked other bag building games in the past for solo experiences like Coffee Roaster. This one feels slightly different. It has a little bit more of a kind of a quick tempo to it than the other type of bag building games I've played in the past. So that is Warp's Edge. At number 9, we've got Etherfields. Now, Etherfields is a game that I feel like has the most potential to either go up this list or to fall off it completely. And the reason why I say that is because this is a sprawling, epic game, campaign-style game. And I got this late in the year. This was actually put out late in 2020. And so I have not had a chance to go through the whole campaign. However, I can say that while it is not a perfect experience, I would say it is a flawed experience, it still makes my top 10 of the year because what it does well, it does very well, and it creates an experience. This is something that a lot of games from this publisher, Awaken Realms, that's something you find a lot in their games, is that there are some issues, oftentimes, rulebook issues, issues with maybe even grinding, but the experience that you get out of it, when it's done well, and when you have that kind of great gaming session, it is so good that it pulls you through some of those other elements that maybe are less than ideal. And Etherfields has a very unique theme. It has a very unique aesthetic, and it has mechanics that I think are satisfying. You do have to get through some things that are a little bit clunky, less than elegant, but when it works, when it all snaps together, man, that experience is one that is just fantastic, and why it made it onto my list at number 9. At number 8, we have Tidal Blades. Tidal Blades is another kind of big, epic production. It's a little bit of a smaller experience. It's not a campaign game, but it is one that provides a very satisfying solo experience. Also, very challenging. Tidal Blades is one that you really have to focus on a very particular set of strategies. Now, that means that it plays slightly different than the multiplayer game. While the mechanics are relatively the same between the solo game and the multiplayer game, you really have to focus on getting ahead of your rival. You're playing against a rival character on the champions board. And so it means that you have to maybe focus your strategies a little bit differently than you do in the multiplayer game. However, all of the things I like about Tidal Blades as a multiplayer game, I still like them in the solo game. I really like the dice system in the game where you are kind of rolling dice and having to mitigate against potential dangers. I like the different areas of the, there's no set board, but the different islands that you go to. The game still plays the same. You just have to focus your energies and your strategies a little bit different. At number 7, I have Monumental. Now, Monumental is at heart a deck building game, but it's a deck building game that is kind of fused with a troops on the map area majority style game. All right. You are playing cards in a grid, and you have a 3x3 grid. And what you're going to do is you're going to choose either one row or one column, and you're going to trigger cards based on which column or row you have triggered. And those cards are going to allow you to do things on this larger map where you're going to have troops and you're going to have kind of explorers that go out to explore the map, and you've got warriors that could potentially defeat other, maybe your AI opponent that you're going after, or NPC characters that are seated on the board at the beginning of the game. Monumental is a game that surprised me very much because I didn't know how this kind of connection between deck building and troops on a map would work. And it works really well. The AI system is a card-based automa style system where you flip over 2 cards and you do a series of actions accordingly. Very, very fun game. I like Monumental a lot. Pardon me. At number 6, we've got a much smaller scale game, but certainly no less satisfying, and that is Calico. Calico is a game themed around bringing cats to a quilt that you are creating. And it is at heart a abstract style puzzle game, and those tend to work very well as solo experiences. Calico is delightful. It's very, very quick, but boy is it thinky. What a puzzle it presents to you every time. You have a series of scoring goals that you're trying to complete, and they basically have to do with different patterns of quilts that you are creating. Certain cats like different patterns, and different goals that maybe will have all different styles of patterns surrounding this particular tile, or 3 of one type and 3 of a different type, things along those lines. Very simple to understand goals, but very difficult to achieve. And it plays quickly, easy setup, easy teardown, a very satisfying puzzle in a short period of time. That is Calico. At number 5, I've got another space-themed game. This is Under Falling Skies. Under Falling Skies is a dice game. It is one that really kind of evokes the classic arcade game Space Invaders, if you're familiar with that game, where you've got a kind of ever-encroaching series of alien invaders, and you are trying to protect your city. And in Under Falling Skies, you're doing this by dice placement. Okay, and you're rolling dice and you're placing them on particular spots that can trigger different things. They might give you resources like energy. They might fire lasers, and you have to manipulate these ever-increasing alien invaders into particular spots where you can destroy them with a missile, things along those lines. And you're also moving your excavator down to try to get access to more and more actions that you can do. Very tense, very quick playing. It provides a really satisfying experience in a short period of time, and it is a really delightful puzzle. That is Under Falling Skies. At number 4, we have Dune Imperium. Dune Imperium is another deck builder game that is married to a different mechanic, in this case, worker placement. And in Dune Imperium, you are playing against a pair of rival AIs, opponents that you are having to contend with. And you do this either through flipping over cards, or there's also an app that you can use to simulate those card draws. And so what you're having to do is you are competing with worker placement spots, which is something that you oftentimes will find in solo worker placement games where you have to compete with spots. But there's also a combat element to this game, which I think really ramps up the appeal for me. I didn't know how I was going to like this. I didn't know how it was going to work out, but I really do enjoy the solo experience in Dune Imperium. You have to kind of account for what would normally be intrigue cards that your opponents in a multiplayer game would play, where you might feel like you're going into a particular combat with a clear advantage, but they might come at you with a particularly powerful combat card. And in the solo game, that is going to be kind of simulated through turning over these cards that will give you a certain amount of strength that they add. So it's like they're playing an intrigue card. So you do have to account for that, and it may feel a bit random, but that's really what happens in the multiplayer game as well, is that you can never be sure what your opponents have. And I really like that feeling of tension, of not feeling like I know what's going to happen. So Dune Imperium is a game that I liked in general a lot, and I think the solo experience does a really good job of replicating that tension, that anxiety, that not knowing exactly what's going to happen at any particular point. Is that spot going to be taken from me? Am I going to win this combat? That race to 10 points that is felt in the multiplayer game, I think is handled really well here. At number 3, we have Viscounts of the West Kingdom. This is the third in the trilogy, the West Kingdom line, and I really have liked all of these games. Viscounts of the West Kingdom is another game that involves deck building to an extent, because you are traveling around a kind of a circular style board, and you are gaining cards to add to your deck. You are also competing against an AI opponent, and you do this through a series of card draws. And in Viscounts of the West Kingdom, you have 4 different AI opponents that you can be playing against that have their own player boards, and they have their own particular thing they're trying to do. Perhaps they're trying to build more aggressively, or perhaps they're trying to get manuscripts more aggressively. So it's nice in that you can play against different style AI opponents. They're all using the same cards, but they're doing it in such a way that they are shifting their focus. And that's a really clever system for this AI. It's something that's been a hallmark of these games really for a long time, these Garfield games AI opponents, where you have very simple card draws, very easy to administer. You're not having to put a lot of time and energy into what the AI is doing. You're able to focus more on what you're doing. And they are very challenging opponents, very challenging opponents. So if you get a victory, you feel like you've earned it. A really great multiplayer game and a stellar solo game as well. That's Viscounts of the West Kingdom. At number 2, we've got a polyomino game about cats. This is Isle of Cats. And Isle of Cats, I think, is just a delightful game all around. You have a player board, which is a boat. And essentially what you're trying to do in Isle of Cats is you are trying to rescue these magical cats off of an island before it has some type of a destructive event. And you do this by getting baskets. Really, it's a card drafting game. You're getting cards that are going to give you particular abilities. They're going to give you different scoring goals that you're going for, but they're also going to give you ways to get these cats off the island and onto your boat. And your boat is broken up into different rooms, different sections, and the cats are represented by polyomino tiles. And so when you rescue these cats onto your boat, you're trying to place them in such a way that they create families of like cats, and you're trying to cover up rats that are on your boat, and you're also trying to fulfill scoring goals. What's great about the solo game is that it is played against an opponent on the same board, okay? And so what's really clever is that you are round by round figuring out what color cat your AI opponent most wants. And so the most points, they'll get the most points for. And so as the game goes on, you're getting more and more information about what your AI opponent is going for. And it's all happening on one board. And that is so unique. It's very rare that I've seen anything like this. As a matter of fact, I can't think of another AI system quite like this, where you and your opponent are both working off the same board. So Isle of Cats is a game that I have loved from the first time I played it, and it's gotten better. It certainly has not gone down in my estimation. My number 2 game is Isle of Cats. Finally, my number 1 solo game of 2020 is Dwellings of Eldervale. This is a game that I have absolutely adored. I feel like it does so many things well. It is a game that I feel like is just almost right up my alley. Like, there's nothing about the game that I don't like, including the solo variant. And so in Dwellings of Eldervale, this is a game where you are placing units on a modular board, a tile board. And so basically it is a worker placement game, but it also has elements of tableau building and resource management. And all of these are things that I like. In addition to that, you're playing against a ghost faction that is going to have their own units that are there on the board. And the AI system, I think, is really clever. You have 3 cards that could potentially be triggered at any time. So you have some limited information on what they might do, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen because you have to roll a die to see which of those 3 cards are going to potentially be triggered. And so you are competing with this AI opponent. They are going to spots. They are involved in combat just like a regular opponent would, but it's also very easy to administer. Very few rules are changed or even adjusted in the solo game to the multiplayer game, and I think that that's crucial in a game like this where there are so many interaction points. That's something that's hard to pull off in a solo game, is a game where you have a lot of interaction points like this one. I think Dwellings of Eldervale does a fantastic job of replicating the multiplayer experience and making it easy on the solo player through simple administration of the AI system. So, there you have it. My top 10 solo games of 2020. I think this was a particularly strong year, and I'm thrilled with the direction that solo gaming is going, and I hope it continues to grow. That's it for me. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.